Okay, the following group of recordings, 4 in a row, entered as one file, to be exact, will comprise selections A10, A11, A12, and A13. A10, 11, and 12 are relatively brief, in the vicinity of 2 to 3, 4 minutes each, and then A13 is a 41-minute selection. So we have in this combined A10 through 13 about a 51-minute selection and file on computer. So very briefly, A10 and 11 will be a little bit of meditation instruction guided, so the volume might be quite low as it was sitting with the student. Some of what to do with the breath in A10, and then in A11 a recap of the total protocol of what he had learned as far as sitting in meditation up till then. Then we get to A12, and that's a brief feedback from the student, which was Damon in this instance. And then when we get to the longer full body selection of A13, we'll have briefly cover the topics of how to transform hindrances to help in meditation, and then I'll talk about the process, the traditional process which we found was going on even in the current venue between myself and the student, which traditionally between teacher and student, or in fact of anyone approaching, the truth or coming to him, and that was the hearing, reflection, meditation, and realization. I'll spare the Sanskrit words for now. And then a reading from Gradual Awakening, an explanation of that by the teacher. So that's a brief overview of what's coming in this about 51 plus whatever minutes have taken for this introduction. So approximately maybe 53-4 minutes. Coming up, we're starting now with selection A10 of No Ink.
I'd like to introduce to you this evening a small little tool that can help you. And it's just a tool or device, nothing to get attached to or overly indulge or concerned about. And it's just a simple way to help the body and mind calm down using the very process we're already in touch with, which is the breath. So what I'm going to do, I'll demonstrate it, and then you can practice it as well. I'm going to simply elongate my inhalation a little bit, make it maybe 1.5 times to 2 times what it is naturally. Not a lot. I'm not going to be breathing in for 10 seconds or anything. So I'm just going to consciously, for a little while, make it a little bit longer inhalation, a little deeper, a little more air coming in. And during that time, I'm going to say simply to myself internally, peacefully, calmly, breathing in, I make peaceful the body. And then as I release that breath, I'll also see that it lasts a little bit longer, 1.5 to 2 times the normal exhalation. So it'll be a little protracted or elongated exhalation. And during that exhalation, I'll say internally, calmly, quietly to myself, breathing out, I make peaceful the mind. So then I would begin the practice with a little slower, longer inhale, and during that I would say, breathing in, I make peaceful the body. And when it's time for the breath to leave quite naturally, not trying to hold it, if there's a hesitation for a second or two, wants to stay in the lungs, that's fine, just let it happen pretty naturally. And then let that exhalation be, again, a little longer, equivalent to the increase of the inhale, not the same, not very much longer. And then breathing out, and make peaceful the mind. So once again, breathing in, I make peaceful body. Breathing out, I make peaceful mind. What I would like you to do, if is using your fingers to count. Do 10 rounds of the breath in this way. And then just let go of it completely. Forget you ever even did it. And return to the awareness of the natural breathing. Okay? Start that now, breathing 10 breaths in this way. Take your time, no rush. Enjoy the process. It's very pleasant, simple, but useful practice you can start to do whenever you need it, whenever it feels good. It can never do harm, only good, this practice. So start 10 times. That was a good 35 minutes of sitting, in which we started by taking a good posture, rooting the lower body, taking some deeper breaths and releasing thoughts on the exhale, and then sweeping down the body in a downward wave. Did it a couple of times, then whole body awareness. And making peace with the mind, allowing all things to be, letting go any desire to change anything, being at peace with this moment of consciousness. And after sitting quietly that way for a while, we did the normal breath awareness, where the natural breathing was felt at the nostrils. After a while, then we introduced a simple technique of elongating the inhale and saying, during that inhale, breathing in, I make peaceful the body. And then during a slightly elongated but yet very relaxed exhale, we said to ourselves inside, breathing out, and make peaceful the mind. We did that for about 10 full rounds, and then we let go of that and returned to our practice. And then after a while of resuming the practice and using some noting, whether the distraction was body, mind, or outside, and returning to the breath at the nostrils, then we let go of that mode, made no further effort to do that. And then we chose to just hear the pure sound and dwelt there for a while, and then we chose to add the pure sensation and dwelt in those two realms, just pure sound and sensation. So this is a general protocol or scheme or method of procedure that you could use in all your meditation, all useful tools. Use any or all of these elements. And it's a good idea to even use that sequence as we did tonight, as best you can remember it. And this will go a long way toward liberating consciousness from the samsaric mind, or the dualistic mind, or the obsessive mind, or the ego personality mind, or the suffering mind, whatever word we want to use. So this is some of our main tools that if we employ them regularly will help us a lot. So leave it at that, and I'll leave a few minutes to entertain some questions, with the condition that let the questioner stay removed from their mind even when asking the question. So if they're so removed, even the question may lose significance and dissolve, and then that would be wonderful. But that doesn't mean we're going to stop any questions if you have some.
I'm all questioned out.
Good. So then we're done for tonight?
I feel like I've been creating a crescendo, an increasing volume in my presence at work, and clearly I know what I'm up to, but at the same time, it's the right thing to do for the job I was hired for.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it's not so much a question as a statement. My assumption is it's up to me to find a healthy balance of both. Like, I don't think it's possible for me to just fall off a cliff one way or the other.
Balance of both what?
Being aware of the self-serving nature of what I'm doing for other people.
Okay.
So, like, making it as if I'm able to visit that room without defining myself there. Is it just up to me to sort of figure out a mature balance?
I don't know about figuring it out. I would say as a product of more and regular and deeper practice, those things will all take care of themselves. That would be my answer. Okay? So the answer always to everything is practice more.
That's good.
Is there anything else that's basically contrived and still a product of the ego? It's not that it's wrong to try to figure things out and make a balance. You know, that's also legitimate in its sphere. But the great balance of nature, you know, the Taoists would say the great balance of the Tao is completely natural, unconscious. You know, Lao Tzu, who wrote the Tao Te Ching, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You know, he didn't have a human master, and he would call the Tao, the principle that created everything, he would call that his master. And he says, "Oh, my master, see how the heavens, he sets the heavens to spin and the galaxies to move through the universe, and you know, all this grand thing, and says, and yet he does nothing." So that's the way life becomes much more easy and flowing, and all the questions are answered, not from the mind and the conditioning, but from reality. So the question of balance then will become more a function of your practice. Make sense?
It does, because I had that feeling with my grandmother.
Good.
It just was. You know?
Correct. And then we know that anything that comes, if you will, spontaneously, naturally, by the Tao, if we use that language, is always the right thing. Mind could be, you know, wrong or right, could be to our benefit or not, because the mind is very confused. Mind is crooked, the Tao is straight.
Better to do the practice.
So let's talk about that particular hindrance of having a discomfort or pain or something in the body that would preclude a fully perfect, if you will, not that there is such a thing, but a fully cross-legged and upright position for the whole period. So if discomfort or even pain comes in the body, what we can do is make that situation the object of our awareness. In other words, part of the meditation. So ultimately, when we understand nothing is a hindrance to meditation, all is grist for the mill, as it's been said. All is fodder for your mindfulness. So every experience in general, but particularly a physical experience, and particularly an unpleasant physical experience because it's a hindrance to our sitting, is a binary event. By that I mean it's the resultant or product of two factors. There's a physical factor and there's a mental factor. So there'll be some muscular fibers, some neurons firing in a certain part of the body that are irritating, or at times what we could call physically painful, and that would be component A, if you will. And then there'll be an internal mental reaction to it. I don't like it, I want to change it, it sucks that it's there, should I sit through it, should I not, what do I do? And that's a separate component to the binary event, and let's call that B. So your experience C is the resultant or product in the mathematical sense of the two factors A and B. Is that clear? Mm-hmm. Okay, so when we look at our physical experience in that way, we can see that the experience that creates a hindrance to simply sitting in meditation with calm body and mind watching the breath is cyclically accumulative in nature. That that means there's a cycle of physical sensation and then mental reaction which feeds back, creating more cycle. We may or may not be able to address stream A or factor A, the physical part of it. But we can be aware that it's there, and we can be aware that stream B or factor B of the internal mental reaction is there, and that we may have some say in. Certainly we can choose the time frame with which we heed its urging. For instance, the leg hurts and there's a strong impulse to move it, but we could step back and say, well, I'm going to wait a minute or half a minute and see. So we'll be interrupting the cycle in the mental factor. Therefore, the resultant will be different. And this understanding, what I'm describing now, is actually the key to freedom, one of the big keys to enlightenment. Ultimately, an enlightened human being has interrupted the cycle completely, so that even the physical death doesn't perturb the mental experience. Okay, at least if you want to project it and extrapolate it to that point. But short of that, while we're sitting here in the present with living bodies, it's certainly possible to be more composed than the average bear under the influence of physical phenomena, unpleasant, painful phenomena, and for that matter, pleasurable phenomena as well. So we develop a certain very valuable and salient component or main thing that we want to develop in meditation. It's called equanimity or even-mindedness. So the next time the hindrance arises, especially physical hindrance, very good material to work with, you can see it clearly, the neurons firing, the sensations, and then you can see that the experience of suffering over it is a resultant of the binary process. In other words, the mental factor had to be there. An example we could use in the extreme is that if you're in a car accident and your body is really mangled, but you're unconscious, there is no experience of pain. The body has been mangled, the reactions are there physically, but there's no experience because the mind is absent in its awareness. So when we're awake sitting in meditation, we have much lesser dramatic and bearable pains. We can use that as a way to understand how human consciousness functions. So you can check out the model that I've laid out and see if it's true in yourself. It sounds logical and so on, but the liberation comes from experiencing it for yourself, that it's a binary event. Stream A of physicality and stream B of internal mental reaction contribute, result in, multiply to be product C, which is your experience. So therefore, once you understand that clearly, you see you can have an effect for the better towards equanimity and even-mindedness in your experience. That's one of the great fruits of awareness. Is all of that clear? Okay? So you can use that in your practice. So nothing is a hindrance. You can sit there and actually use everything that comes to your advantage to go toward enlightenment.
Reminds me of what a good comic does when he's on stage.
Yes. Like with the hecklers, perhaps?
Well, the master comic takes whatever he's given and it turns it into great.
There was a traditional Tibetan teacher who was a little far out because he came here to the West. He was called Chogyam Trungpa. Have you heard of him?
Mm-mm.
He was big in the 70s. He was a raging, really bad alcoholic, but he had some enlightenments. He died early from liver problems because he wasn't fully enlightened. He couldn't control his drinking. But he was born in Tibetan tradition, so he did have some deep wisdom because he was influenced by masters when he was a child. So he said a lot of good things. And enlightenment, by the way, is by no means does it follow that there'll be an integration completely of a personality. That's for sure. Okay, it's only, enlightenment is easier than integrating it completely to have a fully healthy personality that lives long with no problems. Hopefully that would be the ultimate goal. Okay, but let's work with enlightenment first and understand what that is.
A truly enlightened person can still be an alcoholic?
No, not at all. Zero. You cannot be. No. So he had elements of enlightenment, but he was driven by the unnatural behavior of needing to have an intoxicant for whatever reason. He hadn't conquered that. That's my view. Other people might say no. I can only answer my view.
he said some good things. He said, your experience can be shit or it can be manure for the field of Bodhi, which meant enlightenment or wisdom or the flowering of the higher consciousness. So he used to say, we will transform the shit of experience into the manure of experience to become the Bodhi, the field. So that's a very enlightened thing. He had enlightenment in order to say that. Okay? So do you follow what I mean? So. Okay, so that's a very important process. I'm sure in language either somewhat similar or at least understandable, relatable to what I've just used. Stephen Levine will address that in The Gradual Awakening. In a moment, I'd like it actually. Is that book handy enough that you could find it?
Yeah, I can find it.
Okay, in a moment, because I want to point out maybe one or two useful chapters. And I'd like you to work with that book primarily. I don't want to say to the exclusion of others, but in terms of seriously using it as an aid to meditation, let it be your main one, because it's like having a really good teacher with simple yet profound language, and he's got a very wide bandwidth, as you were saying earlier, about what I'm saying. In his written form in that book, it's held up over many years. I do highly recommend it. It's really, really useful, and it's very mostly simply expressed, because he's talking about things that are pretty deep that you need meditative awareness, and he says it in pretty plain language that's very helpful for the meditator. It's superficially useful for the reader, but for the meditator it's very useful. So I do highly recommend it. So any questions about what I've said so far and the new ground we're sort of covering in understanding how to deal with the hindrances to meditation, because then they can be transformed and they're no longer hindrances, and that's how you get stronger and you grow. Do you follow that?
I think it definitely can add to a certain mental toughness that I need to...
That's correct. That's a good way to put it. We need that. Without that, forget it.
And that's, I think, where you lose everybody in this new agey bullshit.
Correct. They're not mature enough. They're not ready. That's a very good observation. Got it. I really do. My opinion is, as I stated on that last recording and so on, that you're way ahead of the game because it's important enough to you. That's the reason. Because you're deep enough of a person that that value is much higher on the priority list for you than it is for them. See, they're still doing a bypass and fooling themselves. Their thing is who's going to love me and so on, and they're talking about spirituality. So it's bullshit. In you, the other factors are still there, but there's a good run for the money with this real spiritual desire. That's why you're staying and listening to me and meditating and growing, however it would be, whoever would be, the guru function for you, whether it's anyone living or whatever it is. That's the reason in my take of the subject of you in this case. So that's good news. That means if you have the real value, that means the real fruit is coming your way.
Well, if I think for the first time in a long time, I can see what my attachments really are.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And now it's more of a sort of internal bargaining between, I know it's an attachment, but, and then I daydream a lot about work, and I think for me work has always been my identity, and
Sure.
I think I start to just think about how all my needs are going to be met
Right.
by this little dream world, and
which is the case with what you've just said is the case with most human beings, especially modern Western society. The difference is you have some awareness of it, and very importantly, Damon, your awareness is that which is free of what it is aware of. Do you see that? In other words, the factor that can recognize it is not caught in it. That's why when we build awareness, we gain freedom. Follow?
Mm-hmm.
So we start to develop over time what the yogis call the witness. The witness is unaffected by the stuff it sees. The worldly mind, the samsaric mind, the dualistic mind, is all about the stuff it sees. It goes as the wind blows. Okay? So it's the leaf in the wind in the Zen terms. But as we sit, we become a mountain of awareness that's unmoved by whatever's passing through us, whether from others or from our own internalized self. So when we get free of our own internalized stuff, the product of our dualistic, ignorant mind, the product of the karma of the past. When we get free of that, we start to taste real freedom, sweetness. It's beautiful. See, when you my job is to get you to taste it enough that it's going to be very easy for you to be motivated to practice. You know how in the talk I talked about the 2 motivations of practice? Okay, if life isn't painful enough, the negative motivation won't be too strong. That's why the Buddha said, don't be lost in the Brahma worlds. So if you go to higher levels of consciousness, or if in the external Brahma world you make a good world outside, it's a hindrance to your enlightenment because you get attached to the pleasure there. But if you have more intelligence, you realize that's going to change, and that's eventually going to burn you, and you see that everybody having a good time in this world, to use the modern analogy, is partying on the Titanic. Right? The whole thing's going down. So when we get that, so then negativity that comes into life becomes a good thing. It becomes more manure, not just shit. It becomes manure to practice. And as we get older, realizing our mortality more realistically, it becomes a good thing, an advantage to practice. So really, the true spiritual path is a beautiful thing. It's the transformation of all things that the worldly sees as hindrances and problems into pure fuel that burns and goes into your enlightenment. So it's a very beautiful process, and you become very strong through that process. You look at everything correctly. Okay? If you could get a hold of that Gradual Awakening book, please do that. Thanks. And go slowly and do some mindful walking as you go to find it. Just feel your movements. Just like we were on retreat. Feel your hand reaching for the book, feel the intention to pick it up, and then the movement that follows the intention. And feel all of that on the way back until you get back here and hand me the book. Notice the internal intention before the movement happens. If you can, even notice the impulse that travels from your brain to the muscles. You can see all that if you pay attention. That's mindfulness. In action, not in concept. You follow? Excellent. Okay. See right there, I just practiced what I was preaching to you. I saw the desire it was appropriate. You were handing me the book. And then in a few microseconds, I saw the desire, the impulse go to the hand, and then the movement. So that can be done. And that's mindfulness. Okay? So we're looking at this book, Gradual Awakening, and I'm recommending it as a very great companion for anyone sincerely on the path. And you have started reading it, right? And please make an effort to get your own copy, okay? Because I want this one back because it's going to be helpful to other people, okay? But you can hold on to it till you get it.
I think I've read everything, but I would love to read it.
Please do. I would say it's indispensable in terms of a companion for the modern, aspirant or meditator. It's really helpful.
Yeah, I've been allowing myself to dwell in this sort of intellectual mind trip in the book that I've been reading, the Tibetan book of Living and Dying.
It's easy to happen in any book. See,
but this is true. I get weird.
Much simpler. You see the difference,
yes.
Right? Yeah, because when you get to those esoteric concepts, it's a known thing in spiritual circles. You could say you're dwelling on the roof with no foundation. You're going to fall. The roof is just a dream. There has to be a foundation. Foundation comes first in posture, then relaxing, then letting go of thoughts, then developing a little focus and concentration using a simple object that's not of the mind, which is your breath. So systematically, you build the foundation. See? Then there'll be a house, and then there'll be a roof. Higher consciousness will come. You follow? So that's a metaphor that we use for the way a human being grows. All of these chapters I'm reading, every one of them is, completely relevant. That's why this is such a great book and has held up for such a long time. Let's look at chapter 2, The Power of Wisdom. I'll just read. Often we hear people speak about meditation, we hear about wisdom, we hear about knowledge. But what actually is the effect? What's the use of wisdom or knowledge? Understanding. When you understand mind, you're not at its mercy. Kind of similar to what I was saying, right? Mm-hmm. When you don't understand, you're lost in the midst of it. It's the difference between being in bondage to thought or being liberated by it. See, in those few sentences, he says what it is. Beautiful. There is a difference between wisdom and knowledge. We experience a moment of understanding and say, ah, that's how it is. Then we think, now, how did that happen? And perhaps later we try to explain to others how it was. The experience of understanding is wisdom, but trying to capture that understanding, to convey it in thoughts and words, is knowledge. We all have knowledge. We can all convey a lot of very far-out ideas. But if wisdom does not precede the knowledge, then knowledge is second-hand, it's another's understanding, and it lacks depth. That is why two people can use the same language to convey an idea, but one's words will penetrate deeply into our hearts, while another's will just ricochet around in the mind. The power of the experience behind the words, the being behind the knowledge, is the wisdom, the real transmission. For instance, a book may say that all beings are one. We think, sure, I can see how that's true. Everybody's got a body, everybody's got a mind, everybody's got emotions, everybody eats food and breathes air, we all live on this planet. I understand what that means. Then during a moment of deep awareness, we experience ourselves as not being separate from anything else. In fact, there isn't even anything else to be separate from. And we think, wow, we really are all one. But when we try to communicate this experience, we find ourselves saying, almost in exasperation, we're all one. We're using the same words we had read before, but they're inadequate because the meaning has changed so drastically. It can't be communicated, it can only be experienced. The purpose of this book is not to share knowledge, but to indicate that wisdom is available within each of us, and that the work of balancing the mind so that it can shine through is the work we must each do for ourselves and on ourselves. For me, this writing is part of my practice, and I have to make sure that I'm being honest myself. It's easy when our mouths are open to fall asleep. That's the time we most often are out cold. We are projecting who we think we are, projecting our games and opinions, which keep deeper understanding from arising. Okay? I've called that the dualistic mind, the self-image mind. Thinking about ourselves stimulates.
How do you, dualistic, can you define exactly what you mean by dualistic?
Yes, what I mean by dualistic is actually a much deeper level of experience for it to make sense, but I'll say it at least so you can have the concept, okay? Dual means two, right? In the normal consciousness of people, even of meditators until they go pretty far, other than for a second, and then it's not deep enough, they don't understand. So let's say in everybody's normal experience, there's a bifurcation of their consciousness into a subject and an object. I'm sitting here and there are objects. My body, my thoughts, my sensations, the realm of sound, and so on. Even externally, even more drastically, if we open our eyes and we're awake, well, I'm here and there's a bottle, there's a book, there's a lamp. That's dualistic consciousness. And that seems to be the reality of the world. Okay? So, dualistic consciousness can only support self-image consciousness. In other words, they go together because you're subconsciously and consciously at all levels of mind, you're thinking, I'm here and the world is there and I have a certain relation or context in which I exist, and the relations I have as a subject with these objects, the nature of them defines the type of thoughts I have about myself. Okay? And the constellation of those thoughts is my self-image, and that affects my experience, both physically and mentally.
So it's something that's external, manifesting and making you think, or trying to define you, letting you think you're defined by these external things, like reflecting back?
Well, here's the thing. The term dualistic was first brought into usage by people that had transcended it. So it was kind of a double-edged sword. It isn't the best thing to give to beginners or people who've never had a mind that became completely quiet of thoughts. Okay? But since it's out there and you're going to encounter it, and you asked me about it, I'll do my best to explain it. So this bifurcated consciousness in which subject and object obtain or persist, our general consciousness, is not the only way consciousness can be. But most human beings will never know that at all. They'll talk about it, maybe even read it or listen to people that have it, but they won't know it. The only way you'll know it is if you get silent enough. Okay? And that's what we would call non-dual. or oneness consciousness. But you can't understand it with thought, because thought functions in dualism, in subject-object. I'm here and I'm receiving some information about which I'm forming concepts in order to understand it. And that's the worldly mind. See? So you'll only know something other than that if you persist in the practice. And you may have to take that on faith from me for right now.
Good enough.
But I'm trying to. So dualism was kind of a high-level thing that fell to earth. Like if you saw that movie, The Gods Must Be Crazy, somebody threw the Coke bottle out of the plane. It's kind of like that, because only a person that's been in non-dual can really use it meaningfully. Do you follow?
Yeah, and I can,
So that might help you.
Well, and also when we think about things in terms of subject-object,
Yes.
That is the definition of existence for most people.
Correct.
I mean,
that's all they know. Yeah, there isn't. You know why? Because it's a wave function, my friend. That's what I could put it into that. You see, usually a mind is full of a lot of waves, and then those few that are a little wiser, they'll calm down enough, and they'll get it to where there's less wave, and the function has reduced, both in its amplitude and frequency, but it's still very much a function that translates psychologically as I'm sitting here and there's some experience. Okay? Now, the only way that can go deeper or get quieter, or the wave function to go into abeyance, is over time with more sitting, as the system gets used to it and gets quieter and quieter and quieter. So then when it gets quiet enough, it goes below a certain threshold. It could probably be measured in millivolts. It's electrical in the brain. When it goes below enough, then the being or internal awareness of a person, that chit aspect, the awareness aspect, okay, of your being, which is there because we're humans, we're not a chair. See, a chair's not in dualism, but it can't know it. It's just, you follow? A human being could be out of dualism and know it because it has chit. Because we have a nervous system and brain, so it's possible. So what would happen when you go below that wave function is that it's not you who will see, because that's, again, the grammar of our language is based on dualism. But that's the best I can do because that's what we have. The experience will be that there isn't that bifurcation to subject and object. What it'll basically amount to is no content, aka silence. See, if you think about it, that's waves. That's why this is pretty subtle. That's why this teaching especially, well, you asked a pretty key question about dualism. Most people wouldn't be able to get it. Only those in the category I've broken down the mentality schema of categories. The average person that's not that bright and emotionally dependent on things, the most they can do is dualism. So they have to embrace Jesus, or like your friend Tina there, she'll have to, whatever. Everybody, but only a few can understand what I'm saying now. You're in that category because you're smart enough, but it's new ground. The reason is you don't have the reference because you haven't been quiet enough, because you haven't had the training, and you haven't been exposed to the wisdom, because you haven't met many people like me, and you haven't really studied the East directly. What you've studied has had to be through the filter of the concepts and the unprocessed emotions, which create a lot of noise in your mind, so you can't get it. So even if Jesus and Buddha materialized and told you another language better than mine, you still wouldn't get it. But little bits of you, your intuition is still piercing through those veils. That's why it hears and it knows, like a ring of truth. And that's why the person who gets that will continue to practice. Okay, so it's an extremely relevant, pertinent question that you asked about the dualism. It cuts right to the heart of the matter. So what will happen when the mind gets quiet enough? It will see that the subject-object setup that most people think is their life and reality is basically an illusion. It's a movie. So if it's a movie, to use a much simpler metaphor now, you'll experience what's there when the projector's turned off. Okay, which is nothing that when the projector is on, anybody can understand. Here's another metaphor I'll use. Let's say we're born moving or running. Like they say, a shark never stops, right? It has to move water through its gills. So let's say we're sharks, but we have human minds and we're philosophizing about being still. They'll never know. Okay? So human beings are talking about higher things that are functions, if you will, or lack of functions, more accurately, of stillness. They're the absence of the functions of movement. But we talk about them from minds that are moving, so we can't understand them. Do you follow that? So when you get that deeply, that'll be a stage in your evolution where you'll stop trying to do the impossible. See, you'll stop trying to understand it with your mind. It doesn't mean you'll violate your logic, but you'll see the limitation of your logic. That's a very different thing. A stupid person that's not very bright can't do that. They'll give up before, or their logic circuits aren't fine enough to get to the point where they see their own limitation. But yours are. So you can. So that's why I try to explain it this way. And what will happen then could largely be described as relief. Your brain will stop trying to figure things out. Like one master said, we had a very bright student that was trying to understand the nature of reality, and he held up a tape measure, and he said, "Here, go measure the universe for me, and then come back." Or another metaphor you could say, he wanted to understand the ocean of reality, and he gave him a little Dixie cup. He says, "Here, bring it to me." In other words, that's our intellect trying to understand what is. You follow? Mm-hmm. So the question is very good, and I think even answering this way is probably good. Will help you penetrate a little bit. So when I say dualistic, and when other people use it, those that have experience outside of it, it just means the mind that functions on subject-object and all the baggage that goes with that. In other words, when you only know that, there's a whole slew of imprisonment and suffering that goes with it. There's no freedom because you think you're the center of the universe, which is not the truth, and you base your life based on something that isn't true. That's why it never works. Like I said the other night, it doesn't work for Donald Trump. Yeah. It doesn't even work for a successful ego. Mm-hmm. You follow? It breaks down. It doesn't bring happiness and peace. See? But when we go beyond, when we get quiet enough, when we go into non-dual, or oneness, we return to the Tao, if you will, then it's very different. Experience is different. It can't be understood, but it can be experienced. Then if two people both legitimately have the experience independently in their own consciousness, then they could speak meaningfully if they wish, but most of the time they don't even have to. Just silence. When it becomes so silent, you understand there's not two minds there. There's only one mind. It might be two bodies, but there's only one mind. Okay. So that's what we're all one means. So the implications of that then change the way you view things and people and so on and so on and so on. Okay, but I don't know if that's helpful at all. Yeah, that was an aside from that. So, and we can return to that in the future. So the purpose of this book, returning now to reading Gradual Awakening, Power of Wisdom, Chapter 2. The purpose of this book is not to share knowledge, but to indicate that wisdom is available within each of us. And we'll make sure you get copies of this and you listen to it over and over again. Do you remember what I even reiterated tonight, and you'll hear me say many more times? The process, see, it's going on. The classical process of learning, of moving from darkness to light is happening. Hearing. You're hearing something from a higher level of consciousness.
Definitely.
Then reflection. Right? There's Sanskrit words for each of these. They're not important, but if you get to the level where you study that, you'll see them. Mm-hmm. But they're real. See, I don't know it secondhand because I read it. I read it long after I saw that's how it works. And, yeah, they're right. That's a good analysis. Okay? Mm-hmm. So the worldly mind or dualistic mind, the mind that hasn't ever been quiet enough to understand, first it hears, then it reflects, which is both conceptual and non. It gets to levels of your being that are deeper than conceptual. Goes into your heart, your intuitive sense. Okay? Then meditation, as you'll understand what you're doing, and then realization will come from the meditation. Does that make sense? So that's kind of what's happening.
Seems like a good roadmap.
Yes. One aspect of the power of wisdom, then, is its ability to cut through what we have previously thought to be real. Each time we learn something new, we discard an old opinion. We change opinions, But wisdom is a stillness, a light within, in which we can see what opinions themselves are. Not just this opinion as opposed to that opinion, but what opinionism is. In other words, opinions in general. We'll see the nature of them. Opinionism is just mind clinging to an idea. He's exactly right. When we open to the wisdom mind, we see how things are and say, well, look how things change. See, Buddha defined enlightenment in one very profound statement. He said, enlightenment is seeing what is. That seems like the simplest thing. Well, I do see what is, but we don't, because there's a screen of opinions. And in each person it's different. It's created by karma.
It seems... Okay.
Do you follow that?
So, one of the things that I've noticed is my perception of events can be incredibly different depending on whatever baggage is going on.
Of course, yes. That's what he's talking about here. Yes.
And so, because, like a crime scene, you can have 4 witnesses and each witness is totally different.
That's correct.
You're saying, I know the 4 differences, probably what you're saying is that none of those 4 is right. Because
correct, that's right. The reality of the experience of the person seeing the objective event is real enough for that person, but it's actually nothing to do with the event, if you want to use that. And again, that's just objective dualistic language, but it has meaning in this context. So yes, our reality is, Shakespeare understood, he said, life is as you make it.
Oh,
right? As you make it in your mind. So I'm going to conclude here because I have to go soon, but I want to read this last paragraph, and then I want your homework to be study this chapter.
You got it.
Power of Wisdom, chapter 2. Opinions are constantly changing. Mind is constantly changing. Body is constantly changing. World is constantly changing. Our relationships are constantly changing. As simple as that statement is, it has great wisdom. He's basically saying in English, Buddha's first seal or mark of existence, anitya, impermanence, change. Physics. It's the same thing physicists say, right? So it's a profound truth. As simple as that statement is, it has great wisdom, and wisdom is generally quite simple because it applies everywhere. The truth is the truth here, and it's the truth there. It's the truth in chemistry, or physics, or thermodynamics, or psychology. In other words, that everything changes. Each is just a different form in which the same truth resides. It's like the truth in the law of karma, cause and effect, being equally manifest in Newton's laws of motion, which state that for every force there is an equal and opposite force in the opposite direction. Because this truth may be expressed differently at different levels of experience, it might seem paradoxical, but that is the difficulty of trying to hold wisdom in knowledge, in the limitations of language. Follow? That's the point why meditation is necessary. You will not be able to understand higher things with your intellect. It's a limited tool. You
so
must
Wittgenstein said,
get quieter. Yeah, you must get quieter. Yeah, he said the fly bottle. I'm just helping man get out of it. Yeah, he was right. Some Westerners got close to it. Last paragraph I'll read to you. When we start meditating, it becomes very clear that everything is changing moment to moment. When we sit for even 5 minutes trying to keep the attention on the breath, we often think, I can't keep my attention where I want it. It goes to this thought and then to that thought, to this sensation, then to that smell, then to some sound, and then on and on and on. We notice that one thing after another comes before the mind's eye. We see it's all a flow of constant change, coming and going, each moment leading to the next. This insight seems so simple that we may say that it's not even wisdom. But when we deeply experience change, when we deeply understand that nothing is permanent, our wisdom grows. The next thing we discover is that nothing we want, here's desire, the Buddha's truth, can give us lasting satisfaction because everything is in flux and nothing stays forever. Whatever it may be, the finest food, the most gratifying sex, the greatest sense pleasure, nothing in the universe can give lasting satisfaction. It will all come and go. It is this condition which gives us that subtle, queasy dissatisfaction we carry about with us most of the time, even when we do get what we want, because deep down we do know that eventually it will change.
So he's touching in modern language on Buddha's first truth, something that you see when you meditate. Okay? So I'm going to leave it there, and I've only touched the beginning. There's another almost 2.5 pages of that chapter. I highly recommend it. Most of his chapters are short. So do this one, Power of Wisdom. Read it when you go to bed tonight.
Yeah,
I highly recommend it. And then I would almost say this is so good, and his wisdom in creating the book, I think you should just go in order and read like a chapter a day with your meditation, and when you finish, do it again until you get your own copy. Then give me this one back. So if you can make that a regular homework, do that. Because just listen to the titles before I go. You're going to read The Power of Wisdom. You could start it back at 1, Awareness, if you want. But since we jumped into 2, Power of Wisdom. Chapter 3, The Wanting Mind. Chapter 4, Uncovering Mind. Next, Self-Image, an imagined self. Judging Mind, the sense of unworthiness. Self-accepting mindfulness. The hindrances. Giving, watching from the heart, a gradual awakening. I'm just reading the chapter titles. Snaring enlightenment, mind stuff, loving kindness, letting go of hell, pleasure, pain, and happiness. He's contrasting pleasure, pain, and happiness. 2 different things. In other words, meaning pleasure is not happiness. Because pleasure and pain are 2 sides of the same coin. They go together. That's dualistic mind trying to grasp. When we see that clearly, and in our wisdom, naturally let go of it, then happiness and peace come. See, that's the process. Karma, a sense of the observed, guided meditation on energy in the body. He sprinkles in some guided meditations, and so on and so on. So please use the book. That's why I gave it to you.
Yeah,
okay?
absolutely.
Okay, we're going to finish there. Thank you very much for your good work once again.
Oh, thank you.